Early in the morning of Tuesday the 18th of January 1881, a vigorous snowstorm enveloped Devon and Somerset. By the afternoon, the Culm Valley branch line was completely blocked and no trains were able to run. The snow fell continuously for 36 hours. Culmstock was completely isolated, and by Friday evening both the CVLR and the Tiverton branch were virtually inaccessible. The Tiverton Gazette reported that the Culm Valley could not be found. It was obscured, almost as if it had never existed. Today in February of 2001, there is no snow to obscure the valley, yet there is still hardly any evidence on the landscape in this beautiful part of Devon that the Culm Valley Light Railway ever existed. But once upon a time, there were the delightful sights and sounds in the valley of a busy little railway that is still fondly remembered by many who live in the area and frequented this service. Come with us now on a journey. Let's step back in time and enjoy revived images of the Culm Valley Light Railway. Here 'tis Devonshire, my answer. This part of the southwest is some of the most attractive countryside in the British Isles. Now I would say that because I'm a Devonshire lad myself. Hundreds of thousands of visitors flock to Devon for holidays each year, and summer usually hosts crowded beaches and famous attractions. But just off the M5 motorway and the main London to Penzance railway is a prosperous industrial valley with just a few major attractions. Novelist R.D. Blackmore of Lorna Doone fame once wrote about it. It is the valley of the River Culm. Through this valley for almost 100 years ran the Culm Valley Light Railway. Whilst the main line just a few miles up the road thundered with powerful steam locomotives en route from London, the Culm Valley engines were of the smallest class and often hauled but one single coach up and down the line. In modern terms, I suppose you could say that it was all a bit laid back. It was a light railway system, but we'll explain more about that later. By the 18th century, agriculture had become the predominant industry in the area, and many corn mills had grown up around the River Culm and its tributaries. The problem of transportation was looming. Roads were primitive, and the expanding transport of the age, the good old horse and cart, was finding it hard to cope with the poor road facilities. I suppose it was a case of potholes rather than motorway cones. But major developments were stirring in the north of England, and this would soon have a profound effect on the Culm Valley. In 1808, Richard Trevithick displayed his newly designed train set to a largely uninterested public on the site where Euston Station now stands. He tried hard to convince everyone of its merits, but just seemed to be going round in circles. In the north of England, industrialists, particularly in the coal mining industry, realised that greater loads could be pulled if primitive wagons ran on rails instead of trundling on badly made roads that led to rivers and seas. Horse-drawn trains emerged, slow but getting there eventually. The stationary steam engine had already been invented, and some bright spark thought of putting wheels on it so that it could be used to pull wagons up and down a metal railway, thus pensioning off the good old horse. Hence the very first industrial steam locomotives appeared around the coal pits in the north of England. By 1813, William Hedley and Tim Hackforth had developed their famous locomotives, Willum Dilly and Puffing Billy. I suppose it sounds better than Thomas the Tank Engine. Another pioneer of steam was George Stephenson, who started life as a boot repairer, bless his soul. On the 27th of September 1825 he built his famous locomotion, and to the cheers of crowds and excited passengers steamed into Darlington. The Stockton and Darlington Railway was launched. Transportation would never be the same again. With Stephenson's victory at Darlington, he now saw the opportunity to link the two great cities of Liverpool and Manchester, so he built tunnels, cuttings and viaducts plus 63 bridges, thus showing his great skills as an early railway pioneer. Robert Stephenson also arose to fame by linking Birmingham with London on the permanent way. Then one of the great engineers of the century, I.K. Brunel, emerged as a master engineer and forged his Great Western Railway to Bristol. By 1844 the Bristol and Exeter Railway reached Exeter on the broad gauge from Taunton. The Culm Valley was now within easy reach of a growing national railway network system. The mainline railway corporations were beginning to yield large profits, but where some small rural lines were concerned, the larger companies thought it best to leave the task of building to local people who could raise their own capital. In keeping with the often callous thinking of many accountants, the larger companies would keep their eyes on the smaller branch lines and buy them up cheaply if the venture became a financial failure. But the light railway school of thought was beginning to take shape. There was an expanding belief that where traffic did not support it, there was no need for a fully equipped railway. One built to lesser standards would suffice. In other words, a light railway. The Regulation of Railways Act 1868 envisaged three provisos. 1. That no specific Act of Parliament would be needed. 2. The axle weight should not exceed 8 tons. And 3. Speeds were not to exceed 25 miles per hour. An early proposer of these light railways was one Arthur Cadlick Pain, who had his family roots in the Bridgewater area. He served some time as an assistant to W.R. Galbraith and P.R. Brereton, who was an assistant to I.K. Brunel. On the 15th of May 1872, a first meeting was called at the George in Uffculme and some 25 people attended. On the 15th of May 1873, the Culm Valley Light Railway Act received royal assent, giving the board 5 years to build and complete the branch line to Hemyock. But the building was not without its problems. Construction engines broke down despite their £3 a day hire charge, and navvies assigned to build the line found other things to do. A couple of them ran off for a month with 2 of the married ladies from Uffculme. The townsfolk responded by burning effigies of the 2 women and their husbands, the women for running off in the first place and the husbands for having them back again. Despite completion of the station sites, there were flood problems, construction setbacks at level crossings, and constant cries of "When will the Culm Valley Railway be finished?" Labour disputes arose frequently, and many navvies deserted the railway contract to join the militia. Oh, and the money was running out, and much of the budget had been wasted. The original estimate for the line building of 22,500 had reached 40,000, and Payne's forecast of a 12-month build had turned into 2.5 years. Then there was the takeover of the Bristol and Exeter Railway by the old devouring Great Western. Apart from that, everything was fine. The board of directors consisted of Henry Ellis, Charles Follett, William Furze, Edward Lutley, H. Helmer Porter and William Barnes, a motley crew seen here on the day of the official opening, that's the 1st of June 1876, with a number of shareholders. This official day of celebration was marked with particular rejoicing at Hemyock when the inaugural train carrying the directors arrived at 1:30 p.m, apparently bang on time. It all began that day. The Culm Valley would never be the same again. The line now completed would run from Tiverton Junction, that was on the main Bristol to Exeter Railway, to Uffculme, Culmstock and Hemyock. At a later date, halts would be added at Coldharbour and Whitehall. It's hardly noticeable as the HSTs thunder through it today, but this is the site of old Tiverton Junction, the beginning of the Culm Valley branch. The platforms are still here with some other obscure historical relics. Apart from that, it's a who knows and even who cares scenario. It was not so long ago, well about 50 years anyway, that this was a mini hive of activity, serving the main line to Plymouth and Penzance and branch lines to Tiverton and the Exe-Valley, as well as the line to Hemyock. It opened on the 1st of May 1844. By March of 1876, the Bristol and Exeter Railway had laid a third line between the broad gauge from Taunton to Exeter, so that standard gauge trains could reach into the southwest. So, from the outset, the Culm Valley Light Railway was able to connect with the main line. Without runaround, the carriage was backed up the gradient, the engine moved into a short refuge siding, and the carriage was free-wheeled back into the platform. On the 12th of May 1986, Tiverton Junction station closed when Tiverton Parkway was opened a short way up the road. In 1992, the old station buildings were demolished, and that was that. To give an idea of the geographical location of the old line from Tiverton Junction to Hemyock, the film's director and cameraman Phil Lilly captured these aerial shots. Below you can see the M5 motorway just above the old Tiverton station site. From his elevated position, Phil found it difficult to locate the old Culm Valley Railway trackbed, which today has been partially obscured by industrial and housing estates. To help identify the line further, we will graphically highlight the approximate areas where the branch operated. We are now on our way through the valley to the first stop, Coldharbour Halt. Even though it's February, the view from here is quite breathtaking. The feature of Coldharbour today is the Working Woolen Museum, a tourist attraction in the midst of the most luscious surroundings. The halt opened on the 23rd of February 1929. It was inaustere and simple, built of solid timber. There was a waiting room, or should I say hut, a concrete lamppost with an oil lamp, and a station sign almost a third of the length of the platform. Rumour had it, in the early days, that the crossing keeper used to take the hut and lamppost home with him each night to combat vandalism. The keeper's hut was of typical GWR design, and the approach for passengers was crude to say the least. And just look at that notice board. Got any chalk, anyone? But despite its simplicity, there was a warm, quaint feel to it all. But alas, it all disappeared around November of 1963, and today a car park for the Woolen Museum stands where once the sights and sounds of steam engines passed. Leaving Coldharbour, it's only a short run down to the first of the branch's main stops at Uffculme, nicely captured in this aerial photograph in the mid-60s. One of our film's consultants, Max Stuart, works here at Lloyd Maunder Animal Feeds, and this is opposite the site of the old station. In previous days, when George Small & Co operated a mill here, there was always plenty of goods traffic for the railway. In 1930, this area at the bottom of the town was busy with railway traffic. In this unique study, 2 of George Small's horse-drawn carts can be seen in the goods yard, and one about to turn in. Were those the days, or were those the days, I ask myself. The station was particularly noted for its flower beds and roses growing all over its name-board. Interestingly, during 1903, nearly 9,000 passenger tickets were issued here, 4,700 parcels were forwarded, and some 2,200 tons of goods received, including 86 trucks of livestock. Now, wouldn't that make headline news? Whilst passenger services were dominant in the days of the branch, it was customary to see mixed trains. This one is the 12:10 p.m. which originated from Uffculme each Monday to Friday in the 1960 era. The coach is one of 2 ex-Barry Railway 5-compartment gas-lit short coaches that arrived at the branch in 1950. It was scrapped in 1962. Gas-lit, eh? Today there is no evidence that a railway ever existed here, as we found out on a cold, sunny February Saturday on a location shoot. On now to Culmstock and back to Phil Lilly to determine aerial shots of the old route. That'll be a pint of Guinness for me and a bitter for my mate Max, please. The Culm Valley Inn used to be called the Railway Hotel in years gone by, and today landlords Lance and Hannah Print still recall yarns of the old branch lines. Then there were the reports of refreshment breaks at Culmstock. As the train drew up at the station, the fireman or guard would hurry into the bar at the Railway Inn and order a tray of drinks for the train staff. And why not? The simple layout at Culmstock consisted of a loop siding passing through a goods shed with a couple of short sidings to serve as cattle docks. Everything changed in 1963 with the removal of all sidings. In this study from 1962, the morning short working has arrived at Culmstock with 1421 running around, ready to become the 12:09 p.m. back to Tiverton Junction. And here 1451 negotiates the level crossing. Notice the old Railway Hotel sign in the background. And what about this charming study of children at the crossing around the early part of the century? Note the double arm signal on the station side of the gate. I suppose we can be glad that the pub is still there anyway. But alas, all traces of the railway are gone forever. Now where can this be? It's sort of in the middle of nowhere, but wasn't that often the situation with many country halts? It wasn't until February of 1933 that the GWR opened Whitehall Halt and installed what can only be described as an economic or maybe prudent facility. There was a timber-faced platform even shorter than the one at Coldharbour, but the notice board was a bit more stylish. Mind you, there's no information on it. A small wooden hut never did make it to the platform level and lived just inside the level crossing gates opposite an even smaller unit for the gatekeeper. After all, he only needed 2 levers on the ground frame to control entry and exit to the siding, and this was prohibited to locomotives. This study features number 1421 arriving on the last day of passenger operations in September of 1963. Now I ask myself, would Whitehall Halt have been nominated for Best Kept Station? I think not, without a pair of grass cutters at least. Here the fireman opens the gate in November of 1961 for the 3 p.m. from Hemyock. Even after passenger services closed, the passenger hut remained in service, but only for newspapers to be dropped off for the local residents. Later in the film we will observe some unique archive moved images, along with other footage of the branch. The current owners of the site are keen to keep the memories of the halt alive, but it's not like the real thing, is it? Here's Journey's End, Hemyock Station, and what changes there have been since the station was first opened to passengers in 1876. Even at that time there was talk of extending the line all the way to London, but as it is, it ends here. We're now just over 7 miles from the junction and 400 feet above sea level. Major changes occurred at Hemyock shortly after 1930, when the whole of the layout west of the station was revised. The engine shed was closed and pensioned off with the carriage shed. In place of this, a more convenient runaround loop was installed together with a new corrugated iron goods shed on the north side of the platform. There were no signals here after the turn of the century, so the sign on the signal box was a bit of a bluff. Goods traffic was busy, and this study shows the 2 sidings into the butter factory in 1904. In later years, milk wagons were prominent on the line with produce from the Cow and Gate factory just over the road, later to become the St Ivel Creamery. Mr Quick, station master at Hemyock in the 1920s, stands proudly in his frock coat between the 2 shunting porters and next to GWR 1300. Little Mickey Green is apparently waiting to complain about the lack of job opportunities for miners on the railway. In 1903, almost 15,800 parcels were forwarded from here and 4,237 passenger tickets issued. 2,980 tons of goods received, with 70 truckloads of livestock handled. Oh, and season tickets weren't available until 1923. The site is totally void of memories today. It was even difficult to assess the position of the old station buildings, but don't despair. Thanks to the expedients of amateur cine enthusiasts, we can still enjoy images of the working railway all the way from Tiverton Junction to Hemyock. Amateur cinematographer Arthur Harris of Wellington captured these movie images of the railway in operation on standard 8mm film in 1962, and are we glad he did. It was in fact this exclusive footage that inspired our production. Now we can relive the journey through the valley to Hemyock and enjoy the sights once encountered by the many who used and loved the train. And as we go, consultant Max Stuart will offer some of his personal recollections of a line that he too loves so much and sadly misses even today. Max works at Lloyd Monder of Uffculme, very close to the old railway site.
I work at the feed mill at Uffculme, which belongs to Lloyd Monders, which used to be a mill's been there since about 1928, so I can gather from people in Uffculme. It's been there quite a long time, and the railway used to run behind the mill, and across the road in front of our mill into the station across the other side of the road. And like I say, it went behind our mill because we used to have a little siding in there years ago that used to put tankers of molasses in underneath our bins. But the railway used to run right behind the mill where I work now. I think basically the railway was one of the most rural railways in England. It sort of followed the Culm Valley line, and in the old days we used to get what was known as a runaround ticket, and that enables to travel anywhere from Taunton down to Newton Abbot. Unlimited travel back in the late 50s and early 60s, and we used to go to the junction and take a trip up the Culm Valley line. And on a beautiful summer's day, from the carriage, and the time it took to go, 7.5 miles, it used to take nearly an hour, the scenery was unsurpassed. You could see lots of wildlife. It used to follow the river most of the way. You could see lots of wildlife, birds in the river fishing, and on a summer's day it was just an ideal way to pass a couple of hours. I think being what should I say, that I love steam railways and being brought up in an age of steam. I think steam railways had something that diesels didn't. Steam railways were sort of living things. You felt as though the engine taking you, even on a 7.5 mile route along the Culm Valley, was a living thing. You know, and as has been said before, talking to you before, we all considered back in those days that the railway engine, calling these little places, we treated as a friend. But the Culm Valley was one of the most beautiful rural railways, to my mind, in England. It was a real rural railway, and that was part of its charm, that it took so long to get where it got. That was part of its charm, and I think you know, like I said earlier on a lovely summer's day, it was a lovely trip. Yeah, I was not on the actual last journey of the Culm Valley Railway, but when closure came, it was the same as the Exe-Valley Railway. People felt, as the Exe-Valley Railway, people felt that a stroke that had been cut off, and although bus services were promised, that they weren't adequate to cover the loss of the trains. And I think to a certain extent that some of the villages were just completely cut off. And when you get little rural places like Whitehall Halt, which had a train service, it didn't have a bus service that called in there after the trains had stopped. And I think that a lot of people were sad that the railway went, although the actual railway lasted another 12 years for freight only. The engines primarily used on it, the ones I saw most of all, were the old 14O class, such as 1442, 1470. I remember those two on the line primarily. Others of the same class might have used it, but those two I remember prominently. And the actual coach that you travelled in was an old ex-Barry gaslit coach, because it's the only sort of coach they could use on the line because of the tight curves. Basically, I mean, being a youngster at the time, we didn't really take much notice of the rolling stock, but now years later you can identify with the trains that used to run on your local lines. Yeah, you know, well, there's nothing left at all. And I think my comments to you at the time was, good gracious, since the last time I was out here, it's just been levelled to the ground. And even the factory across the road's been levelled to the ground, where the old dairy used to be, St Ivel Dairy. And it makes you think, you know, did we really do the right thing? All these stations and little halts all raised to the ground. I don't know. Perhaps they call it progress.
Passengers on the CVLR came in all shapes and sizes. For instance, in 1927, a horse booked passage to Ireland and a horse box was sent to Hemyock by the afternoon train to collect the unusual passenger. Now this box was very old and only met the restriction of the reduced branch loading gauge. At Hemyock, the oil lamp from the groom's compartment was lit and carefully placed in its position in the roof. Unfortunately, the extra height was enough to foul an overbridge near Tiverton Junction. The lamp smashed and poured burning oil onto the hay and straw below. The train arrived at the junction with the horse box belching flames and smoke. Fortunately, the fire was arrested and no permanent damage ensued. A good job really, or the CVLR would have been saddled with a hefty claim. The line was indeed a day-to-day feature of the valley despite being underused by the locals, but it served many other uses. For example, there was a series of coded whistles used by the train drivers. Before schools could afford the luxury of telephones, the driver would warn the headmaster that a visiting school inspector from Exeter was aboard. So insignificant was the travel value of the CVLR that when it closed to passenger services, not even a replacement bus service was provided for the valley. I suppose it was a bit like a discarded ornament that used to sit on the mantelpiece, underused but sadly missed. And what about some trivia? One snippet from the GWR Directors' Board minutes is the decision to write off 6 shillings and twopence stolen from Culmstock station in May of 1880. And did you know that in 1963, if you wanted to travel from Uffculme to Coldharbour, it would have cost you 3d. Mind you, it would have been 2 shillings for the entire journey through the branch. I recently had to go from Plymouth to Coventry and it cost me £109. How times have changed. Oh, and I must include this one. The last passenger train in September of 1963, hauled by Loco 1421, was late. 7th September 1963, and crowds pack Hemyock station. Now this is a sight probably not seen since the line's opening in 1876. It was not a celebration but a gathering to say goodbye to the last passenger train. After this, only Uffculme and Hemyock would remain open for goods traffic. From Saturday the 7th of September, small 204 horsepower diesels of the type introduced by BR in 1957 would operate a daily service, the train crew opening and closing level crossing gates. It was a time of great change on the railways in the UK, not just because diesel was replacing steam, but so many unprofitable branch lines were being axed and sacrificed to the gods of economy. For 87 years, a small steam engine with a carriage or two, always elderly and substandard, had trundled up and down the valley 4 or 5 times a day to a largely unvaried timetable. Now less romantic diesel shunters hauling goods heralded imminent closure of all traffic. In September of 1965, traffic to Hemyock ceased apart from that which served the milk factory, and by May 1967 only the siding at George Small's mill remained active. The branch continued on until 1975, after line strengthening to accommodate larger diesel hydraulic locos of Class 29. These were the heaviest to work the line at 68 tons. And on the 31st of October the very last traffic over the railway was seen, and this ironically was just 7 months short of achieving its centenary. Just over a year later, by January of 1977, all the track had been lifted. It was the end of an era. In his book The Culm Valley Light Railway, Michael Messenger concludes his narrative on the line by saying, "The question remains of whether the Culm Valley Light Railway was a success. As a pioneer light railway, perhaps not, nor as a branch of the GWR empire. But as a character on the British railway stage, it was eminently successful. It did make its own contribution in a minor way to a pleasant Devon valley, and by being unorthodox and non-standard, contributed to what we now call the quality of life. A part of the valley, it was an endearing and delightful railway, and is remembered with great affection by those who knew and used it." The Great Western Society, Taunton Group, with the help of British Rail, have a grand habit of popping up on old branch lines, and a visit to the Culm Valley was no exception. In October of 1973, A journey from Exeter St David's to Tiverton Junction and Hemyock aboard 3 brake vans at the rear of milk tanks hauled by diesel D7575 heralded one of the very last special passenger tours down the line. Thankfully, cinematographer Walter Harris was aboard with his cine camera to capture some of the highlights of the journey. Despite the amateur nature of the filming in guards vans with primitive suspension, this is a unique record of West Country Railway history, and the images are self-explanatory. Although there were 3 brake vans, the 30 GWS members could only occupy 2 of them, as the guard reportedly wanted the last van all to himself. It was a bright sunny day and very changeable, but since it was so chilly, passengers lit a fire in the guard's van to keep warm. The journey lasted all of the Sunday afternoon and into the evening. See the Barnstable line curving off to the left. When the train arrived back at a packed Exeter station, waiting passengers were apparently very surprised to see so many departing the guards vans. Now let's look at some of the motive power used on the Culm Valley Railway. The following were more prominent on the line. The Bristol and Exeter Railway provided locomotives number 114 and 115 at the outset as 060s. Both were built at Bristol in September of 1874 and 1875. Both weighed in at 20 tons 8 hundredweight and were 21 foot long over buffer beams. The wheelbases were 10.5 feet. By the time the line opened, they carried GWR numbers 1376 and 1377. GWR 1376, originally B&ER 114, was transferred to Oswestry in 1932, where it was allocated to work on the Thanet Valley Railway. 1377 was withdrawn in 1927 for use on the Quay tramway at Weymouth. Both engines were replaced by 240 side tanks. 1300 seen here in the early part of the 20th century and seen at Hemyock after the rebuild, including the addition of vacuum brakes. In later years the 1400 class was prominent on the line, such as 1449 seen here at Tiverton Junction in 1958 and 1421 in Crossways Cutting in November of 1962. 1450 is seen at Uffculme. 1466 pulls into Culmstock. Diesel locomotives included British Rail's D2119 used for goods after passenger services closed, and North British Type 2 diesel hydraulic in the 1960s. Monmouthshire Railways and Canal Company carriage in the guise of GWR number 1184, built in 1848 by Smith and Willey of Liverpool. It was just 13 feet long and weighed 5 tons. Photographed in August of 1962, ex-Barry railway coach converted to gas lighting built around 1920. Was 54 feet 6 inches long and carried BR Western Region number W268W. Its sister coach was W263W. And now for all you lovers of West Country nostalgia, a bonus. We'll take a short look at the Tiverton branch, that is Tiverton to Tiverton Junction. Although not technically part of the Ex-Valley line, this branch connected Tiverton, Halberton Halt and Tiverton Junction. Originally part of the Bristol and Exeter Railway, the line dated back to 1848. 14 XX class tank engines with auto trailers, known affectionately as the Tivy bumper, characterised the line for much of its working life, and in later years 12 to 13 trains a day were scheduled each way on weekdays. Many people from the Culm Valley would reach Tiverton via the CVLR for a day's shopping. Max Stuart explains a little of its history and working.
Tiverton to the Junction, about 4.5 miles, and you start off at Tiverton in what they call the Junction Bay, and went along the Tiverton branch out through East Manley, Tidcombe, all the outskirts of Tiverton, and then on out through a series of curves and a big left-hand curve into the actual junction itself, into the Tiverton side of the junction, which I showed you this morning, where it used to pull into that side. And people used to use that quite a lot for two purposes. One, to get from Tiverton as a quick journey to the main line, the Exeter Taunton line, rather than go down the Ex-Valley to catch it at Exeter St David's. That saved them that trip down to there. Or it used to be used from people coming in from the surrounding areas into the market town to do their shopping. Also from Culm Valley, it opened up the Culm Valley as well, because people used to come in to the Culm Valley Bay, go over the bridge at Tiverton Junction, which is no longer there again, and get onto the Tiverton train in the Tiverton Bay and come up and do their shopping.
Halberton Halt was opened by the GWR on the 5th of December 1927. It was conveniently situated about 1/4 mile from the village of Halberton and provided the local inhabitants with easy connection with the main line at Tiverton Junction or the Ex-Valley. It was situated about halfway between the two. You could say it was famous for passenger cycles invariably left on the platform by early risers, perfect for protection from the elements. Unusually, the 109-foot platform was situated right under a road bridge with its 5-star corrugated iron shelter. The Tivy bumper carried a guard on each train whose main responsibility was to collect fares for passengers boarding at Halberton, since there was no booking office. Well, there just wasn't room, was there? Today, the road bridge is still there, but hardly anything else. Tiverton Road, as it was called at its official opening in May of 1844, boasted an odd array of gauges at one time. When the Culm Valley Railway was opened in May of 1876, this station accommodated the broad gauge, that's 7 foot and a quarter inch of the Tiverton branch, the narrow gauge, 4 foot 8.5 inches of the Culm Valley Railway branch, and the main line to Exeter with 3 rails to allow both gauges to travel unhindered. In December of 1995, you would have left Tiverton on, say, the 7:50 up train to arrive at the junction at 8:04, a journey of just 14 minutes. After the addition of Halberton Halt in the 1930s, you would have accomplished your journey in just 12 minutes.
Everything's changed. I wouldn't say for the better, but then being a steam enthusiast, I would say that. But no. I think, looking back now in retrospect, I think we're going to come to regret losing all these branches.
We began this film with the treacherous snows at Uffculme in 1881, so it is fitting that we finish with a similar theme observing these studies by renowned photographer Peter Gray. It's the 2nd of February 1963 and the Tiverton branch is blanketed with snow, but that did not stop shoppers from venturing to Tiverton on a cold, freezing day. On Saturday the 3rd of October 1964, the populace of Tiverton and Halberton said their final goodbye to the Tivy bumper. The last train, that's 042 tank 1450 with 2 auto-trailers W228W and W225W, left the junction at 9:28 p.m. That was the last passenger train, with the withdrawal of goods services following in June of 1967. Such was the sadness of the loss of the Tivy bumper, which frequented both the Tiverton branch and the Culm Valley Light Railway, that on the 14th of October 1978, 14XX class number 1442, having been bought by Lord Emery, was transported by road to cheering crowds from its resting place in Blundell's Road, opposite the old goods yard, to Tiverton Museum in the Railway Gallery section, where it rests to this day in a fitting environment amongst other relics and exhibits of days gone by. Now there are only memories of the branch lines we have considered, the Tiverton branch and the Culm Valley Light Railway.